Welcome. Thank you for joining our 5th Family Business Sustainability Forum from the Grossman School of Business at University of Vermont. These forums are free-flowing conversations with family business leaders who are running their enterprises with sustainability principles embedded in core operations. It's a conversation rather than an interview. I'll start with a few structured questions for our guests, and audience can use Q&A to enter brief questions. Our chat monitors today are 2 MBA students, Matt Francis and Taylor Smith, and their program focuses on sustainable innovation. I will integrate these questions into the conversation and weave them into the conversation. Our first 4 forums featured families from India, US, UK, and Netherlands. And today we highlight an American company, Cascade Engineering of Grand Rapids. Cascade Engineering was founded by Mr. Fred Keller in 1973 on the premise that a business that cares about people and treats them with dignity and respect is sustainable and lasts over time. It was a plastic moldings operation serving the automotive industry from its base in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Today, Cascade Engineering is one of the largest manufacturing B-Corps in the world, with 14 facilities and over 2,000 employees. Mr. Fred Keller, the founder and chair of Cascade Engineering, is with us today. He has long emphasized the role of triple bottom line for longevity of a business. Since early 2000s, he has taught sustainable business courses at Cornell University's S.C. Johnson Graduate School of Management and has been an executive in residence at University of Michigan's Ross School of Business. Fred has served as the chair of US Department of Commerce Manufacturing Council under Presidents Bush and Obama. Fred's daughter, Christina Keller, is the 2nd generation leader of Cascade Engineering, who has served as the CEO since 2018. Prior to stepping into this role, she worked for over 12 years in different parts of Cascade Engineering and another 10 years in companies like Accenture, Polaris Management Partners, and more. A Cornell MBA, she has lived and worked in Africa, Europe, Central and South America. Fred and Christina, thank you for joining us today. And our 3rd panelist today is Stuart Hart, a friend, a colleague of mine, who is one of the founding fathers of base of pyramid economic theory, founder of nonprofit Enterprise for a Sustainable World. His 1995 article, A Natural-Based View of the Firm, is amongst the most cited works on sustainable enterprise. Stu's seminal article, Beyond Greening, Strategies for a Sustainable World, is the winner of HBR's McKinsey Award in 1997. Now a Grossman Distinguished Fellow at the University of Vermont, Stu was the S.C. Johnson Chair in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell, where he met Fred and later taught Christina. Fred, Christina, Stu, thank you for joining us today. I'm looking forward to our conversation. Before we start our conversation, we're going to play a short video, about a 4-minute video, to introduce Cascade Engineering and its ethos.
People, planet, profit. Can we practice capitalism in a different way? I think we can. And we make plastics, mainly waste containers and recycling containers that you have out by the side of the road. My name is Fred Keller. I'm the founder and chair of Cascade Engineering. The objective is to solve social and environmental problems.
We don't have supervisors, so what happens is we have to learn the job throughout the whole plant. There's teams, and you work on that team for 1 whole week and then rotate.
Cascade's Welfare to Career program is our attempt to be able to make a business work that's good for people, where they really want to come to work. said, why don't I put a social worker in your plant?
Everybody that comes from poverty, they're all determined to make it work. They are doing this for the first time in their lives. They're contacting people for help. My name is Joyce Gutierrez Marsh, and I worked for the Department of Human Services stationed at Cascade Engineering.
As my hours increased, my food stamps decreased, and I was a little bit nervous. My name is Amy Valderas. I am a team leader and an operator.
Everyone has the fear of transitioning off welfare, and they just need that little encouragement to make that step.
They care. I ain't used to nobody caring. I ain't used to that. My name is Leon Williams. I'm from Holly Springs, Mississippi, and I work at Cascade Engineering. I've been here for 9 months, and I'm an operator. In Mississippi, life I was living just street life, a violent life. Jobs were very rare. Couldn't go on like that no more. Well, that was the point of me moving from Mississippi, coming to Michigan, to start over, to leave all that behind.
The folks who are in poverty, we learned really wanted this opportunity, but they ran into barriers and they didn't know how to deal with them.
It could be transportation, domestic violence, daycare. We wanted to help them through these barriers so they could be more successful and keep their job.
They believed, Amy, you could do so much more. Amy, you have potential. I had to push myself, and I had to take those words in and just say, Amy, they're right. You can do this.
Cascade, they holding on to me just as much as I'm holding on to them. So when you reach and pick up somebody, they gonna get up. So they made me get up.
Cascade, it encompasses family, that they don't define you by your history. It's about the renewing of you.
By valuing people and being supportive of them, they actually transform their lives themselves.
My name is Jahan McKinley. People call me Jay. I am the manufacturing manager of the Bursman plant here at Cascade Engineering. I was a convicted felon. I was away 19 years.
And he said, I am very grateful for this job. It's my first job I've ever had, and I'm 36 years old. So he comes with his own motivation.
Oh, you're doing a great job. Appreciate it very much.
The biggest thing would be not trying.
1, 2.
And that's the thing that I really want to give my kids, is that you can do anything. You know, you can fall down doing it. But if you never try, to me, that's failure.
If they're thriving, the business will thrive. That is what we want to have as our model for capitalism, helping the human spirit thrive.
Fred, thank you so much for sharing that inspiring video with us. Can you provide an overview of Cascade from the start to now, focusing on a few pivotal points, please?
Yeah, I sure can try doing that. Putting 49 years into 2 minutes is going to be a challenge, but the idea that I started back in 1973 after spending 6 years as a metallurgist at Pratt & Whitney Aircraft, and somebody's going to start doing math and figure out how old I am after that. But the key thing that is I wanted to be able to do something on my own. I was a product of the 60s, and I wanted to be able to start something at that point in my life. And I learned that parents like to have their kids nearby, and my dad convinced me to move back to Grand Rapids. And we kind of agreed that I wouldn't work for him and he wouldn't work for me. But the concept was he lent me a little money, and and introduced me to the bank, and we started in the manufacturing business with a couple of machines. And back then, I didn't understand all this stuff where we're raising money for folks and all these kinds of operations where you get other investors. But I was just going to start kind of a greenfield operation. I had no real background in plastics, but I understood materials. So we started with a couple of machines. We did some subcontract work. My first real customer was Herman Miller. And we ended up over the years making every successful chair, designing every successful chair Herman Miller has had. It's been a great relationship with us. And then, some of the key points were when I hired my first sales manager, a sales leader, that made all the difference in the world. We started going into the automotive business at that point in time. I created a couple of joint ventures with Japanese firms back in the mid 80s. In 1989, we worked a relationship with Waste Management, and we've been doing their work in making these carts ever since. We have maybe the one of the most interesting things was when we, in the mid 90s, started doing work with our Welfare to Career program, which you just saw a little bit of a flash of that. And that was really our first institutionalizing our programmatic side of things, so that we were being able to take ideas and concepts and turn them into real programs within the organization. And that really started my interest in how do we get even deeper in this. In the early 90s also, I was exposed to another business leader around his concerns about racism that his family was experiencing as a result of adopting a child of color. And that was another big point for me that said this whole thing about business really has an impact in how we are going about the process of making a difference in our communities. But then, in the 2000s, we continued with growth, and we expanded into 3 other states. And we also, in the early 90s, I forgot to mention that we established an operation in Budapest, Hungary. And that was a real adventure to watch that country unfold as it was going forward. And then about the mid-aughts, the 2005-10 timeframe, I remember having a discussion with my 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters, and Christina is the youngest. And I was talking about options we had. We had been doing work with our family for years in having them get together and understand what the family business was about. And I was talking about options about we could sell it, we could grow it, we could have it be in the family, we could do all these things. And my oldest daughter kind of leaned in and said, her name is Larissa, and Larissa said, "Dad, this is a family business." And so we decided at that point that this was something that was going to be going for a while, and it was not going to be sold. And that was the kind of a turning point for us as a family business. So that gives you a little bit of a quick overview of how things have unfolded over the years.
Thank you. So Larissa, thank you. I thank Larissa for this, for making sure with that comment. Christina, can you describe your first year at Cascade Engineering and your journey over the years, please?
Absolutely. So joining Cascade Engineering, I joined in about 2009. And we had a rule as we had been doing work, as he mentioned, about as a family business, how do we handle family members that might want to join the business? There was not a predestined, this is where you will go within the business. There was a rule. You had to have at least 5 years of work outside of the organization. And then once you came in, you had to do a rotation program. So my first year was a rotation program. I worked on the production floor. I worked in HR, finance, sales, kind of shadowed different people throughout the organization. And then ultimately they gave me an issue, as you do sometimes in business. There was the hydrate biosand water filter. We had been working with Rotary International. We had been working with others, and the not-for-profit that we were making the filter for was on the brink of going out of business. This was, again, just after 2008. And so our idea was, how can we change this model? And so having taken Stu's class and the base of the pyramid work, really thought about how can we do a entrepreneurship model at the base of the pyramid? How can we, sell water filters, and really spent some time in Africa and Latin America, trying to understand, water is such a huge issue globally. And before COVID, half of the world's hospital beds were people suffering from waterborne illnesses. And it's just something that living in Michigan, where water is abundant and clean, it's something that you didn't really necessarily have an understanding of. And so really my first year was spending a lot of time with that project, kind of developing a future vision for that. And ultimately, we partnered with Native Energy out of Vermont, actually near Burlington. And we looked at, I had worked at ERT, which was the first greenhouse gas registry, and actually using the water filters within people's homes actually displaced the need to boil the water. So it actually had a carbon credit. And so we were able to have the carbon financing help offset the cost of the filters in the developing countries. And then also, we also found that since they're distributed in each home, they were less likely to be susceptible to corruption. Like if you put in a well and somebody comes and says, okay, give me $5 and I'll let you use this well. It's within the home. It actually typically is, they did some studies at the University of North Carolina, and it's more maintained because it's within each home, and it takes within the domicile of the woman in the household. And so it's kind of very interesting, lots of different things to deal with the hydrate biosand water filter. But that was my first year at Cascade. And before that, I really was led by a desire to make a positive impact. I know it sounds a little bit silly, but having grown up in that, I really spent time working with Solar Light for Africa, Pro Peru, working with micro enterprise development. I worked at a greenhouse gas registry, and then the Sustainable Global Enterprise Immersion. And I actually didn't realize that many businesses didn't think the way that we do. It was a kind of a rude awakening, actually, to understand when I was at Accenture and other places and saw into businesses just some of the negatives of what can be in a business, because I had grown up with Cascade. And so I think that was when I really understood that it was truly a unique thing, which I still struggle with because I don't want it to be unique. I think it's the right way to do business and everybody should be doing it that way. But it's part of what drove me to come back to Cascade and to really help in an area where I think we can make a positive impact.
Thank you. Fred and Stu have been pioneers, one a thinker and one a business leader in that. And Christina and I were kind of the second generation coming into the fray of sustainability in the core operations. Stu, as a leading thinker of sustainability strategies, what major changes have you observed in the last 2 to 3 decades in thinking about it?
Yeah, and actually the kind of the picture that Fred and Christina have just painted, I think is a wonderful illustration of how things have evolved, right? That, if I kind of wind the clock back to the late 80s, early 90s, and Fred will remember this well, sustainability then was just, first of all, it's a brand new term, right? I mean, it didn't really exist prior to the late 80s. Back then it was business and the environment, right? That was kind of the buzzword in good currency. And what that basically meant for companies was, kind of getting your own house in order, right? It was reducing waste, reducing emissions, dealing with things in your own facilities and operations. And I think, we got a good lesson in the social side of that, right? With the welfare to career program. But it was also true environmentally, right? That the main focus was on reducing emissions and reducing waste. And by doing so, the business case was reducing cost and reducing risk. That I think that was very much kind of the first stages of, kind of business, environment, and sustainability. But, as the 90s unfolded, it became increasingly clear that just sort of thinking about your own operations and facilities wasn't nearly enough. Not only was it not going to solve the problems, but it also didn't come close to seizing all the possible opportunities. So I think the next step, which is what you mentioned this piece called Beyond Greening, that's really what it focused on, right? That if the greening phase was really about the, internal eco-efficiency and social sustainability angle within your own facilities, Beyond Greening was about reaching out more broadly, kind of thinking upstream, the entire value chain, thinking downstream kind of products and services. What impacts do they have? Environmentally, can you think about closed loop? Again, the buzzword today is circular, but back then it was called closed loop. Sort of thinking in those terms, across the entire value chain, and then socially to think about how could we serve and lift the underserved at the base of the pyramid, not just in your own operations, but as customers and as suppliers. Right? How could you begin to think about that? And you heard a bit about that, with the biosand filter, right? In terms of the Cascade case example. So, you think now more broadly about this being part of the core business, right? Not just sort of cleaning up your own facilities and being a good employer. And then I think, just in the last, maybe in the last decade, there's even a further widening, right, of the lens, when you think about this, of the aperture, where I think increasingly people in business realize that, yeah, that it's really crucially important to think about the entire value chain, and there is real business opportunity there. But even beyond that, we have to think in terms of wider system change, right? That sometimes the constraints that are put on industries or issues or policy issues really sort of slow down or make impossible the kinds of value chain of innovations that companies want to achieve. So more and more you see companies getting involved in partnership ecosystems, right? In, kind of collaborating, public-private partnerships, collaborating with NGOs, collaborating with other companies to achieve a wider system change, whether it's around an issue, whatever it might be, climate change or deforestation, or around a policy issue, maybe it has to do with subsidies or other kind of institutional change issues, right? So you think of it in terms of system redesign or system change. And I think that's where we are now, sort of it's the kind of the ever widening aperture. And it's not like the earlier greening part goes away, that's still there, right? But it's a little bit like the Russian dolls, there's one inside the other. And I think increasingly the idea of business and sustainability is viewed in this much wider sense.
I love your analogy of thinking in terms of the lens and what lens it, and in family businesses, at what lens one is at currently and how to expand the horizon of that lens. Thank you, Stu. Fred, coming back to the first stage of the lens, when you started thinking about embedding triple bottom line thinking in Cascade, what was your motivation and how has that evolved over time?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it didn't just come into my, I think as Stu was saying, in the 90s, it wasn't, sustainability didn't come off your lips easily. It was something that you, in fact, it wasn't popular. I mean, we're just getting out of and really feeling the effects, even in the 90s, of the Milton Friedman proclamation that the most important social responsibility for business is to maximize profit for the shareholders, and that was the norm. That was what people were thinking about in business, and regrettably still pretty prevalent. But the idea that it is changing, there's no question, and there's more openness to it now. But I was really drawn to the idea of how can we have a place where employees, I've come to embrace the phrase where they know they're valued. And when you put that as the bar, where and not feel, not think, but they know that they're valued by their employer for who they are as a person and for the work they do. And that to me was the interesting part. I wanted to be able to create a place where people wanted to come to work, where they felt that this was a place that cared for them and worked with them in a way which they could feel like this is where they want to be forever. And that was what drove me to think about how do we do this better? And that was, I came at from the social side. We ended up going into the environmental side. I mean, we've been a zero waste to landfill place for over a decade. And it's that all is important to us. We use a lot of recycled materials and so on. And we have been doing now for probably 15, 18 years. We've been doing our triple bottom line report. So it's one that evolved from our social impact side and then brought in the environmental side. But to Stu's point, we did not start with the environmental, we started with social.
That's a nice layering of what Stu was setting up as stages of evolution. And now in terms of, we talk about 3 Ps and which P does one start from? Of course, the profits to have a viable business, but then in your case, it's people. Thanks for sharing that, Fred. Christina, when we think about Cascade today, what are some of the positive environmental sustainability initiatives in your business?
So Fred spoke about this a little bit, but I often think about it in the frame of the numerator and the denominator strategies. So in the environmental realm, a denominator strategy is doing less bad or less harm. And a numerator strategy is really being able to grow towards some interesting opportunities. So in the denominator case, as you mentioned, we're zero waste to landfill. Our first facility here, our headquarters that we're in right now, was the first LEED existing building platinum. So we had to look at even taking out the carpet and how we were going to repurpose that. There was a lot of work from that perspective. But some of the exciting things that we're doing on the numerator side is I think it's an exciting time to be in plastics. People often think of plastics and they have a negative connotation for the environment. They're in the ocean, there are other things. But I really think about the materiality. I mean, plastics are not intended for single-use products. They shouldn't be used for something that you're only going to use once, because plastics as a material is around for a long time. And so when you use it for the right materiality, like we have for our trash cans or our recycle containers, they last, their warranty is 10 years. Plus they're typically out there for even longer, going through lots of heat cold cycles and working through the collection. And then in addition, we take back the carts at the end of life and we regrind them and we put them into the new carts. So it is a truly circular approach. Also, the furniture industry has been a leader with the BIFMA standards and other standards to try to say, let's look at what the chair, after you've sat in it for 10 or 20 years, how we can break it down in an effective way and make it into recyclable materials. We've been recently working with Waste Management on the EcoCart, which we're pretty proud of because it actually takes bulky rigids out of the recycle stream, which unfortunately, even though they had been recycled for a while, a lot of times they had been sent to China or other places. And as China said, we're not taking any more of these recycled contents. Some of them are even getting landfilled. And so we looked at that stream and said, how can we use more of that stream in our plastics? And so we're able to use a higher percentage. We're actually working with colorants to be able to even increase that percentage, which is pretty exciting. And then on our material side, we are working on bioplastics. So we're actually working with a group out of Europe, UBQ, that actually takes trash and takes that trash, compounds it basically into a powder, and then we put that powder back into the plastic so that we're actually creating a carbon, a climate positive resin. So that's pretty exciting. We're working with that group out of Israel, UBQ, and then also we have 2 other groups that we're working with, hemp plastics, putting hemp into the plastics, and then also Vichiris, which is a rubber compound that, recycling the rubber or getting rid of the rubber by putting that into the plastic. And so we have a lot of opportunities, I think, with plastics for durable goods that are used in the field for multiple years, and then being able to get creative with how we use waste products and circular economy to really keep that on the forefront.
Excellent. I love your sharing about the opportunities in the denominator and in the numerator. To me, it sounds like the numerator opportunities are quite exciting to think about because those are innovations, although there are innovations in thinking about the denominator or the reducing the impact of current operations. Thank you, Christina, for that. And this is for both Fred and Christina. As one of the largest B Corps with global operations, a lot of family business leaders are asking the question, why join this certification? What's the process like? What have been the after effects of that for you? Could you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, I think you know, when I first heard about the B Corps, and we were among the first, I don't know, 100 or 200 that joined. I was very excited about it because it was really establishing a movement, if you will, that this is how you conduct business in a way that is sustainable for the long term, for the planet and for people. And I wanted to support it. So my first instinct was to support it. The second one was, as we got into the reviewing process, and as you are answering what appears to many people a daunting task of answering all the questions, you become aware that this is a process that is a great platform for making improvements in the future. So it gives you a real opportunity to compare yourself to others. And it also gives you a little bit of a competitive thing. I want to raise my score so that I can be better than I was before in all these areas. And it asks you to think about things from the standpoint of not just the internal operations, but how you impact your supply chain, how you impact your customers, how you impact your employees. So it's a very comprehensive, well done analysis of where you are from a sustainability standpoint. And it gives you an opportunity to put a strategy together to actually get much better in that area.
Thank you.
And I would add that what's great about the B Corporation status is that it creates a common measuring stick for an industry. I think one of the issues with environmental and social progress is that you can sometimes cherry pick and tell a great story, but be doing something horrible on the other side. And so how do you compare different organizations? And so the B Corporation allows consumers to be more aware of not only just, are you a B Corporation, but where do you rank on that common measuring stick? And then be able to, both from a consumer and an investor perspective, continue to enable and inspire folks to continue that journey on that common measuring stick towards more positive, and reward those that are further ahead with the opportunity to support those other organizations.
And for the after effects, you've been a B Corp for a while. In terms of the after effects?
I think in terms of the after effects, I think, you know, it still is not, in full disclosure, resonates as much with the customer base when we have B2B, which is a lot of what we do. But more and more people, employees are excited about that. We had a couple of people that joined because we were a B Corporation, and they learned more about that. So that's an interesting piece. And then also the networking from the standpoint of getting engaged with other organizations. I'm in a small group with other B Corporations that are values aligned leaders. And so I think it's being part of a greater movement. I don't necessarily think it leads to directly more sales. We are also not a consumer product such as a retailly available item, and so people aren't necessarily doing that, and we don't have to worry about the investors because it's a family-owned business. But we are supporting it, and we're excited about the momentum and the movement of the B Corporations.
Thank you. And it is taking off. Going back to the people-centric idea, our MBA students that's one of the first things they check on when checking your company is whether it's a B Corp or not. And I was speaking with the person responsible for B Corp in Asia. And while there was that initial reluctance about going for an American certification, but it's now taking off all around the world. So that is quite a movement that's continuing. And Stu, from your perspective, do you want to add anything on B Corp or the practices of multi-generational family or non-family enterprises that you've worked with? Do you see any differences in them?
Yeah. So when we think about kind of the opportunities that family businesses have, which are typically privately held, versus sort of the more traditional, conventional, large, publicly held corporation. I think it's not always the case, but I think what we find, with the family businesses that have this bent, right, that have this, kind of commitment, is just that, right, that it's really core, right, that if you look at a lot of publicly held corporations, they have, kind of lofty sounding purposes often, right? There's sort of some kind of statement of purpose that's put up on the website. And then they'll have the obligatory set of 2030 sustainability goals, which probably mostly have to do with the kinds of waste reduction, sort of, as Christina was saying, be less bad elements. But sometimes it's more than that. Sometimes sustainability goals also point to things like, we're going to solve these problems out in the world, we're going to feed this many people and so forth. But oftentimes when you climb under the surface of that with large public companies, there's a disconnect, right? So you have this lofty statement of purpose and you have the sustainability goals, but the sustainability goals were often created or developed by, a staff in the company. They may have engaged, people in the business, but they've been largely developed by sustainability staff that have been hired for that purpose. They publish the sustainability report. So there's really not much, kind of connection between the purpose and sustainability and what the corporation actually does through its business, right? There's a disconnect, right? It's almost like it's missing connective tissue. So I like to draw the distinction between, what we might think of as sustainability goals versus business aspirations, right? Or even bigger, when you think about system change, a corporate quest to really have an impact out there in the world in some way. And I find that with the privately held family businesses, some that I've worked with, like Cascade, what you see is that sustainability really is core. It's part of the business aspiration. It's what the company is all about. It's embedded purpose, right? It's not off to the side. It's not a saddlebag, right? So Sanjay, right, the dean of the school, Sanjay Sharma, and I have written a piece, about business education called Beyond Saddlebag Sustainability in Business Education, because it's the same story in business schools, right? Sustainability in most places just kind of hangs off the side, as a few elective courses in the second year, but the core doesn't change. It's the same old finance core and strategy core and so forth. And I think the same is true in a lot of publicly held companies. Sustainability is a saddlebag. You can see it from the outside. It looks kind of cool, but you can always just take the saddle off the horse and it's the same old horse. Whereas, in the family businesses that I think have a true commitment to this in a deep way, it's embedded purpose, right? It's really what the company wants to achieve out there in the world through the business. It's about business aspiration and a larger societal quest.
And something I think enables that is the time horizon. I think a lot of businesses that are publicly traded really get into this next quarter financial return. And when you look at that with micro trading and other things, a lot of times the investors who are invested in the stock market have long-term time horizons. They might be a retirement account or something along those lines, but it gets distorted into what is next quarter's financial return. So you lose a lot of the opportunity to look generationally, to look for your community, to look at the improvements that will be good for the long term. And that's one thing that I think as a family business structure, you're allowed to look, as Fred mentioned, generationally and say, this is a family business. We want to have an impact on our community. And West Michigan has a lot of family-owned businesses, and we're actually one of the highest philanthropy per capita, which is pretty interesting because of the giving back and that sense of, when you're rooted in the community and it's not distorted through Wall Street, that there's some benefits to that.
I totally agree. I've been to a few conferences, a few gatherings of family businesses in Grand Rapids, and it is just amazing to feel the longevity focus of the businesses. Our research suggests that the further off in future family businesses are thinking, the easier investments in sustainability strategies becomes. We have a question for all three of you, is what advice would you offer to businesses that are trying to pivot towards sustainability in industries that are historically extractive, and plastics is an example of that?
Hmm.
I mean, you've done it, but if someone is at where you were in the 70s today, and there's lots of folks thinking about this.
Yeah, I think it all starts with commitment, and the willingness to not necessarily be following in the footsteps of others as much as inventing as you go along. I think it takes innovation. I think the objective, if you start with the commitment, if you start with the idea that yes, this business wants to be, and fill in the blank. In our case, we really want to make a positive impact in our community. That is just part of what we talk about a lot. And how do we do that? How do we make that happen? So it's not only what we do in our own organization, but it's how we are participating in the community. And it's not just philanthropy, but we're inventing new ways in which the business world can make an impact. And an example being, we've had a returning citizens program now for a long time at Cascade. And as a result of that, the community is really responding. And frankly, the whole state of Michigan, not because of us, but the whole state of Michigan is responding in ways which now folks are returning from being incarcerated have a much better chance of having a life that works as a result of how the changes in the policy, frankly, that is allowing that to happen at a much higher level, a much more frequent level. So it's something I think we just need to think about making a commitment to, understanding it, and then innovating your way to getting there as you go along. So much of this this work is done on an ROI basis, that where people try to pitch it as if you do something that's good for the environment or good for people, it'll give you a good return. And that's an okay way to think about it, but it really is, I want to be able to make that impact and it won't cost very much. That's worth a lot. And so I think we need to measure this in terms of what kind of impact are we making, as opposed to how much money are we making as a result of it.
The other thing I would say is on the planet side, starting with some of those denominator strategies. So how can I, as an organization, reduce my waste to landfill? How can I reduce my negative impact? And then as you work through that, some of those numerator opportunities, the innovations kind of come up. And the other piece I would say is really sitting with the tension and managing the tension. I think we have a desire to kind of get rid of the tension and move these things through very quickly. But some of these deep and knotty issues, the environmental issues that we're facing, the people issues, poverty that we're facing, they're not quick fixes. And so it's not something that you can just turn a light switch on and have it be done. So being okay with sitting with that tension and managing that tension. One of the things we found on the people side is really walking alongside people who are having problems and understand where their barriers are. And then what can we do collectively to reduce the barriers? Can we improve the transportation? Can we improve the childcare? Can we improve the opportunities for these folks? And so walking alongside and breaking down barriers, and that's a slow process. It's not a, hey, we just we added a daycare down the street, now everything's done, it's kind of continually checking in and understanding, what are the issues that we're facing? What are the challenges that we're facing? And how can we put our creative energy towards solving that?
Absolutely. Very well phrased. Thank you. Stu, did you want to add your advice to that question?
I mean, when it comes to family businesses that are looking to get started on the path,
Yeah,
I mean, I'm with Fred and Christina. I think you have to begin with where your personal passion is.
mhm.
That I think that's the main driver. And unless, you know, as a family leader, unless you're really personally committed to it, unless it's, you know, sort of unless it somehow really speaks to you, kind of touches your soul, then you're not really going to have the passion and energy to drive it in a way that is required to be successful. You know, as Christina's saying, it's not a flick the switch kind of thing. It's a process of really deeply understanding, of deep listening and of co-creating solutions, and that takes time.
Absolutely. And I can add to that as a facilitator, as a supporter of family businesses. I worked with families and where that passion or that clarity of where we are going may not be articulated as clearly or may not even come from the generation that is currently leading the enterprise, but it might come from the rising generation. And then finding that voice of the family for where are we going in the next 20 to 40 years is sometimes helpful in finding that starting point. And the other part that we've observed with working with family businesses is the generations working together for 2 to 4 decades. So gone are the days when we would think about transitioning from one generation to another, and there's a 5 to 10 year, kind of running together pathways. We're seeing those extended life cycles and extended running parallel, and that gives us the time to do the slow pivot rather than, because it's hard to turn a Titanic, but these are slow pivots that are happening over 10 to 20 years and starting from the point that one feels most comfortable with. In the last few, go ahead, please, Fred.
I'd like to add that I think that one of the important elements is that family business leaders can think of this as being an enabler, not necessarily being the director. It isn't that all the ideas don't come from the family. It comes from the organization. When we started our welfare to career program, that came from the group. When we started our zero waste to landfill, we had a group they called themselves the Recycle Warriors, and they were out there. They were determined. The pink cart you see back here was started by Joanne Perkins, our leader of the cart business, and she survived past the time that her mother and her grandmother had succumbed to breast cancer, and she wanted to figure out some way to do that. Well, she came up with this idea of having a pink cart that we would donate $5 to the Cancer Society in the areas where people were by these carts, and for breast cancer awareness. And that program has been hugely successful. We've donated over $1 million to breast cancer awareness. Over 200,000 carts are now in front of people's homes that are expressing every day an interest in making sure that there is greater breast cancer awareness. So these things we are enablers for this. We don't direct.
Well, thank you for that wonderful example. Our school resides right across from the medical school, and I can see our students smiling, thinking about this is a project for Vermont, because we can certainly work on this. Yeah, the enabler is a great way to think about. Actually, now this is our 5th forum, and in every one of these conversations, the idea of engaging non-family members, employees or outsiders has come up again and again. One of the company in Netherlands we talked about, they're in paint manufacturing and also a B-Corp. They have a green team of their employees that meets regularly to come up with innovative ideas, both on numerator and denominator dimensions that Christina was mentioning. Now, thinking about future for all three of you, 10 to 20 years from now, Where do you see Cascade Engineering, Fred and Christina?
Well, for me, I'm most excited about doubling down on our triple bottom line vision. So people, planet, and profit. I think we have an opportunity with some of the products that I talked about before to be part of a truly circular economy. Being in the waste and the recycling industry, we can help direct some more of those resources back into the ecosystem, even talking in the future about maybe mining trash landfills to be able to have resources to put into plastics. I think that's a really exciting opportunity that we have in the circular economy. And then on the social side, I think, the social programming, I've been really passionate about housing stability and a lot of our workforce and in our community, making sure that people can get to owning their own homes and building wealth for their families. And so looking at that, but breaking down other barriers such as transportation, childcare, helping to support people that work for our organization and to continue with the innovation. So for me, it doesn't necessarily matter the size that we are as an organization, but really that we have that passion, that mission, that focus on triple bottom line, the people, planet, profit, and that we're able to exist as a model for others. It was exciting, as Fred mentioned, that we were one of the first ones to hire returning felons, returning citizens into our organization. Now there's a vocational village where they're snapping people up out of prison because they have great skill sets for the vocations. There's a lot more opportunity for people to be able to restart their lives, and so that's the part that brings me joy and excitement is the work that we do as a triple bottom line organization.
Thank you.
And for me, I'm just happy hearing that story. And I also have learned that over 49 years, that I don't know of a business that has a straight line from here to there. It's always one of these. And I think the lesson that I've learned that the resilience goes up, and my objective is to demonstrate that when you hit a bump in the road, if you take the road of being a sustainable business, that you're concerned about people on the planet, you will be a more resilient business as a result.
Thank you. Stu, as a scholar and an educator at some of the wonderful sustainability programs in the country, where do you see education or thinking from business leaders going in the next 10 to 20 years?
Yeah, I think we're in the midst of a significant transformation. As Fred referred earlier to kind of the Milton Friedman era, right? Which is, in some ways, maybe we give him too much credit, but in other ways, I think he is sort of the emissary of shareholder primacy, right? Of kind of belief in market fundamentalism and short-termism that Christina was talking about. If I look out a decade or so, the whole business logic of shareholder primacy, of profit maximization as the reason the company exists, just simply has to go away, right? I mean, we need a new objective function, and I think family businesses are in a great position to help show how that can work, right? How that works. And one way to think about it in my mind is, for Fred and Christina, for as long as I can remember, the cross that sustainability-oriented business people have had to bear is, quote, making the business case for sustainability. How do we make the business case for sustainability? And when you think about it, if you sort of double click on that, it's really that statement, the idea that we have to make a business case for sustainability is little more than just saying we have to shoehorn whatever we're going to do related to sustainability into the Friedman shareholder primacy way of thinking. That if it somehow is a hit on short-term profitability, then we can't do it. That just makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. And family businesses, I think, are in a great position to help kind of just overturn that way of thinking entirely and get us to a new form of capitalism where where sustainability inclusion is the business, right? It's not making the business case for sustainability. It's sustainability and inclusion is the business, right? And obviously you have to be profitable in order to do that successfully. No one argues with that, but it's a question of what is the real purpose and objective function? Why does the company exist? It doesn't exist to make money, right? I mean, so I think we're in the midst of a transformation. Maybe the last 30, 40 years, you know, we've been deluded into believing that that's what the purpose of business is, just to make money. But I think that's changing, and it must change. If we're going to get to a sustainable future, it has to change.
Thank you. Thankfully, business schools have a role to play in that. And we're delighted to be in a place where we are leading that charge. We've, in our last book, that's Pioneering, we featured the pioneering families who are leading the charge on sustainability. And family business leaders and students will find that useful because we have about 15 cases, including one from Stu that features on Griffith in that particular book. And we are already working on our next book that'll be on, again, pioneering companies, and Cascade is a great example that we will have in there. So we're learning from each other. We're learning from the great examples, the inspiration, and the ups and downs that folks like Fred and Christina are facing and continue to face. Before we let you go, a question about advice for students. We have students from all around the world with us right now. Those who are in graduate programs or undergraduate programs, as they think about launching their career, and many of them have, it's delightful for me as a teacher, that many of them have already signed up their life to work with companies and for companies that are embedding sustainability into their operations. Any guidance that you might want to provide for them? Fred, Christina, may I start with you?
You know, I think they should be good at discerning whether or not the organization they're about to join is committed in the sustainability field or not. That to me is the biggest. They all have great opportunities in today's world. The opportunity to start with a business are great. I think the objective is to make sure that the company you're going to be joining, if they have any understanding, and as a minimum bar, but as the high bar is, are they committed? And if that can be discerned, they are likely to be able to use what they have learned in the sustainability field. Going to an organization that doesn't have that is more challenging, obviously, and will be still possible to be able to bring their skills to that kind of a company. And sometimes there is a big mismatch between what the CEO level aspires to and what's actually being practiced. And sometimes in that kind of environment, a newly minted sustainable business student graduate can be a great service, but it really is dependent on whether or not that top leader is committed.
Thank you, Fred. Christina or Stu, did you want to add anything?
Go ahead, Christina.
I think, you know, one thing I would say is we are still in a relatively siloed environment. And so being able to reach out, I think there's some great opportunities in Grand Rapids, like the Econ Club and other things where you get people from not-for-profits, for-profits, government, even in the same room and talking about some of the issues. And I think that regardless of where you land as a sustainable business, one of the mindset shifts that can be good is getting perspectives from lots of different areas and figuring out how we can work collectively. There was actually an opportunity when we were doing some of our environmental work in the alternative material area that we were able to get a grant or work together with a policymaker on some different items by having a DHS caseworker here. And so I think looking at those as a opportunity of how you can reach out as a business and connect with not-for-profits or connect with government and work collectively towards a purpose, I think is an exciting opportunity, regardless of what organization you join. And the other thing I'll just add as a 40-something woman with young children and other things, there's a lot to manage, and you're probably managing a lot of different things, both at the home front and at the work front. And so making sure that you take breaks and take care of yourself and find where you need help or you need other things so that people can come in and help you with that, so that you can continue with your journey, because it's actually a more exhausting route to go, the triple bottom line route.
Yes.
It's easier to just mentally say, oh, my only measuring stick is to make money. You don't have to think about it as much. It's not as difficult. And so I think it's preserving yourself through that journey, because it's a harder journey to try to figure out how to solve on multiple fronts. And the only other piece would be that in systems work, you can only perturb the system. You can't actually change it or control it. And so you have to let go of some of the control that you feel as a business leader of wanting to be an accomplished leader, and just say, well, I can just perturb it and then we'll see how it reorganizes.
Thank you. Thank you. Not certainly not for the faint of heart. Stu, did you want to add your thoughts just in 30 seconds or so, please?
No, I think Fred and Christina have said it all.
I can agree that it may be more difficult, but it's actually more fun.
Absolutely. On that note, thank you very much for joining us today. We're delighted you could take the time. This is our last Family Business Sustainability Forum of the year, but we do have clips, short clips, and we will have from this one as well. They're being released, available for anyone, and the link is there. We also put it in the chat. So hopefully these are useful for educators, business family leaders, and advisors, everyone. Fred, Christina, and Stu, thank you very, very much. And this brings us to the end of this forum. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.